Welcome to Unbound, the podcast with Beth Curry, author, storyteller, and survivor. This is where books meet real life, where Beth reads chapters from her work and breaks free from the traditional audiobook format, diving deeper into the personal experiences, lessons, and liberation behind every page. Nothing is off limits. Let's get unbound.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Unbound. I'm Beth. In this episode, we are going to move to the Schoolyard, another place that promised safety, belonging, and answers. But as we all know, school has its own rules, its own expectations, and its own pressure to fit the mold. This is chapter 3 in the book, The Schoolyard is Cruel. Kindergarten taught me that my voice was dangerous, and grade 5 taught me that my body was a weapon against itself. The braces had been exciting at first. Finally, something to fix one of the things wrong with me. I was fully convinced that straight teeth would somehow make everything else better. What I didn't know was that the metal in my mouth was slowly poisoning me. Because of course it was. By the time I got glasses that same year, pink frames and lenses that covered half my chubby cheeks, the skin condition had gotten worse. What started as dry patches had evolved into something angrier, redder, more noticeable. But I was still trying to be optimistic. Maybe glasses would make me look smarter. Maybe the braces would make me look older. Maybe if I just fixed enough things about myself, I could finally fit in. I was 11 years old and already thinking like a renovation project. The other kids had different ideas about my upgrades. 4 eyes became the new favorite, usually yelled from across the playground. Metal mouth was another classic, but the skin condition, that's what really gave them ammunition. Ew, what's wrong with your face? Is that contagious? Don't touch her, you'll catch whatever she has. I tried explaining that it was just eczema, just dry skin, nothing that could hurt anyone else. But 11 and 12-year-olds aren't particularly interested in dermatological facts when they found a good target. And I was a very good target. At least I was good at something, even if it was being a target. Grade 6 meant a new school, which I thought might mean a fresh start. New kids, new teachers, new chances to reinvent myself as someone normal. Instead, it meant walking into a bigger pool of potential bullies who didn't know me well enough to see past what I looked like. The school was bigger compared to my elementary school. Multiple hallways, lockers that actually locked, kids who seemed so much older and more sophisticated than me. I spent the first week getting lost between classes, showing up to the wrong rooms, trying to figure out where I belonged. Spoiler alert, I didn't belong anywhere. The popular girls were obvious from day one. A few of them came from the last school, so I was pretty familiar. They had the right hair, the right clothes, the right everything. They moved through the hallways like they owned the place, and maybe they did. I watched them from my locker, studying how they talked, how they laughed, how they managed to look effortlessly perfect, even in the terrible fluorescent lighting. I wanted to be them so badly, it physically hurt. But when I tried to join conversations, they'd look at me like I was a stray dog that had wandered up to their lunch table. When I wore a dress I thought was cute, I'd catch them whispering and pointing, shoving me up against a locker and asking me why I'm wearing a tablecloth. When I tried to sit near them in class, seats would suddenly become saved for other people. Why don't you try making friends with kids more your speed? One of them suggested with an air of Valley Girl sass, but also with the kind of fake kindness that cuts deeper than outright cruelty. What she meant was, stay with the other weird kids where you belong, loser. The problem was, I didn't want to belong with the weird kids. I wanted to belong with them. I wanted to wake up pretty and confident and normal. I wanted to complain about homework instead of wondering why my skin was getting worse every day. I wanted problems that lip gloss could solve. Instead, I was the kid teachers felt sorry for and mostly ignored. The one who ate lunch alone more often than not. The one whose best attempt at fitting in was wearing the same brand of jeans as everyone else, even though they looked completely different on my increasingly round body. Because that was the other thing happening. I was getting bigger. Food had become my comfort, my entertainment, my numbing agent. When kids were mean, I ate. When I felt ugly, I ate. When I sat at home after school with nothing to do because no one wanted to hang out with me, I ate. And the more I ate, the worse the teasing got. And the worse the teasing got, the more I ate. It was a perfect, vicious cycle that I didn't know how to break. I wasn't just the girl with the weird skin and braces and glasses. I was the fat girl with weird skin and braces and glasses. I was a walking collection of everything kids my age were taught to mock. But then something happened that made all of that seem like gentle ribbing. Someone decided I had AIDS. It was 1987, and AIDS was the monster under everyone's bed. Kids my age didn't really understand what it was, just that it was deadly, that it was spreading, and that you could catch it from the wrong people. The rumor started with some teenager who worked at the same place as my older sister. I don't know how he connected my skin condition to AIDS in his mind, but somehow he did. And somehow that brilliant observation made its way back to my school. Within a week, the hallways had turned into a horror movie. Kids would literally run away from me. If I sat somewhere, they'd move. If I touched something, they'd avoid it like it was radioactive. Someone started calling me AIDS girl, and it caught on like wildfire. Don't use the water fountain. She used it. Gross. She touched the door handle. My mom says I can't be near her. The teachers did exactly two things. 1, Jack. 2, shit. Either they didn't know how to handle it, or they believed there might be some truth to it. Either way, I was on my own. I tried explaining that I didn't have AIDS, that it was just a skin condition, that you couldn't catch it from touching me. But by then, the story had taken on a life of its own. Facts don't matter when fear is driving the narrative. The worst part wasn't even the isolation, it was the confusion. I didn't really understand what AIDS was myself, just that it was something terrible that killed people. So part of me started wondering, what if they were right? What if there was something seriously wrong with me that no one had figured out yet? What if I really was dangerous? If you've ever been the target of a rumor so vicious it made you question your own reality, you know this mindfuck. When enough people treat you like you're contaminated, you start to feel contaminated. When enough people act like you're dangerous, you start to wonder if maybe you are. By the middle of grade 7, my skin had reached a breaking point. I was one giant walking scab. The condition had spread everywhere. My face, my scalp, my arms, my legs, places I didn't even know could get eczema. When it cracked, it bled. When it bled, it scabbed over. When it scabbed over, it itched so badly I'd scratch until it bled again. I'd lie on our living room couch covered in cool white sheets and just cry. All day, all night, it felt like. The pain was constant. The itching was worse. My parents had me on oral medications that destroyed my stomach, creams that I was slathered in multiple times a day that barely helped. I looked like a monster. I felt like a monster. And every day, I was supposed to go to school and pretend I was fine, while kids treated me like a walking disease. The final straw came on a random morning when I walked into first period and heard someone whisper, "Oh my God, it's getting worse. What if she explodes or something?" The class erupted in nervous laughter. I sat down, opened my notebook, and realized I couldn't do this anymore. That afternoon, I told my parents I couldn't go back. "We'll get you a tutor," Mom said after another unsuccessful dermatologist appointment, "just until we figure this out." I was relieved and devastated at the same time. Relieved because I wouldn't have to face the hallways anymore, wouldn't have to pretend I didn't hear the whispers, wouldn't have to eat lunch alone while kids stared at me like I was a science experiment. Devastated because it felt like giving up, like letting them win. But sometimes survival looks like retreat. The tutor was nice enough, an older woman who came to our house 3 times a week and helped me keep up with my work. We'd sit at the kitchen table, going through math problems and literature assignments while I was covered in medicated creams trying not to scratch myself raw. It was during this time that I got closer to Kelly, and my dad, my buddy, but first, Kelly. She lived right next door. Our houses joined, and I knew her from when she was just a wee baby and I was a toddler. She'd been watching this whole nightmare unfold from the beginning. While other kids were running away from me, Kelly was still Kelly. Funny, loyal, completely unbothered by my appearance. We'd spend hours in her backyard or mine just talking about how shitty kids could be, about what we wanted to be when we grew up, about whether things would ever get better. Sometimes we would play games on her super cool Tandy computer or spin each other on the tilting office chair. We rode bikes, watched Another World, found trouble, and explored our neighborhood. She never made me feel like a burden or a freak. She just made me feel like her friend. Some afternoons, while the itching was too bad for me to focus on homework, after she got home from school, we'd just lie on the grass and stare at the clouds. She'd make up stories about what the shapes looked like, and I'd laugh for the first time in days. Kelly saved me during those months. She reminded me that I was still a person, not just a walking skin condition, that I was still worth being around, still worth caring about. I don't know if she knew how much that meant to me. Probably not. That's the thing about true friendship. It doesn't feel heroic when you're doing it. It just feels like the right thing to do. But Kelly wasn't my only lifeline during those years. There was also, not my sister, Jen D. She came a bit before. Jen D was different from Kelly. She had this edge to her. I mean, so did Kelly, but Kelly's was less. Jen D had this rebellious streak that made everything feel more exciting. Where Kelly was steady, Jen D was the one who made me feel like maybe I didn't have to be the good church girl all the time. We did the kind of stupid shit that seems insane looking back, but felt like freedom at the time. We'd ride our bikes for miles, all the way to the mall, around the neighborhood, anywhere that felt far enough from home to be an adventure. The wind in our hair, the burn in our legs, the feeling that we were in control of where we went and what we did. Sometimes we'd find houses under construction and break in through basement windows. Just walk around the empty rooms, imagining what it would be like to live there, talking about our futures in spaces that hadn't been claimed by anyone yet. The adrenaline rush of knowing we weren't supposed to be there, of getting away with something small and harmless, made me feel alive in a way that school never did. We had sleepovers where we'd stay up too late, eat too much junk food, and plan elaborate schemes we'd probably never follow through with. Standard elementary school misbehavior, the kind that bonds you to someone in ways that following the rules never could. One year at Pioneer Girls, one of the youth groups at church that Jen D sometimes came to with me, we decided to perform I Just Called to Say I Love You by Stevie Wonder for some talent night. We were probably in grade 5 or 6, and we thought we were hilarious. We took it too far. Way too far. We over-exaggerated the lip-syncing, overacted every gesture, and made choices about how we portrayed Stevie Wonder's blindness that, looking back, were absolutely inappropriate. Whatever backlash we got was completely deserved. We were kids being stupid, not thinking about the impact of our performance, just trying to be funny. It wasn't funny. It was offensive, and we learned that lesson the hard way. But the thing about Jen D is she made me feel like I could be more than just the fat girl with the skin condition. With her, I was someone who took risks, who broke rules, mostly harmless ones, who had fun despite everything else falling apart. She reminded me that I was still a kid, still capable of joy and mischief and friendship that didn't require me to be perfect or fixed or acceptable. We never got caught breaking into those construction sites. We rode our bikes for miles without ever getting lost. We made terrible decisions at church talent shows and survived the consequences. And through it all, Jen D showed me that I could be someone other than the victim everyone else saw. I could be rebellious. I could be fun. I could be the kind of person who climbed through basement windows just to see if she could. That version of me, the one who existed with Jen D, was just as real as the one who was drowning in the hallways at school. Maybe more real, because that version wasn't performing for anyone. She was just free. But I wasn't always just the victim in these stories. Sometimes I was the bully. There was a girl named Debbie who Jen D and I were friends with. I always remembered us being a threesome, often doing things together. I have pictures of us all from back then. Apparently, though, we were quite nasty to Debbie. I say apparently because honestly, I don't remember most of it. Memory is selective that way. We tend to remember when we were hurt much more vividly than when we did the hurting. But Debbie remembered. For over a decade, we were friends on Facebook, supportive of each other's lives, commenting on each other's posts, the kind of distant adult friendship that social media makes possible. And then, in the weeks after my dad passed away, she decided to confront me about the bullying from elementary school. The timing felt cruel. I was defensive. I was raw. I was grieving. But she was also right. I apologized. I expressed confusion about why she'd chosen that moment, why she'd waited so long, why friendship and kindness as adults for all those years hadn't earned me the grace of better timing. She never responded. We're still friends on social media. I still hope she's well, and I still carry the knowledge that I hurt someone badly enough that they remembered it for decades. Kids bully kids. I've never claimed complete innocence. I hung around people who influenced me negatively, and I made choices that hurt people. Some of those choices I remember, some I don't, but my lack of memory doesn't erase someone else's pain. In giving forgiveness for what was done to me, I have to also ask for forgiveness for what I did to others. And I have to accept that not everyone I hurt will forgive me, no matter how much time passes or how much I've changed. Going back again, grade 6 with Miss Cummings was when things got particularly brutal. My skin condition was still raging, the AIDS rumors were still circulating, and kids had gotten more creative in their cruelty. There was this girl, one of the cool girls, the kind who had followers rather than friends. Tracy. One day she took a maxi pad, scribbled red marker all over it, and left it on my chair. I came back from wherever I'd been, the bathroom, the hallway, wherever I'd gone to escape for a few minutes, and there it was. Fake blood, fake period, real humiliation. I vaguely recall the room erupting in laughter. Not everyone, some kids looked uncomfortable, some looked away, but enough of them laughed that it felt like the whole world was in on the joke. I assumed Tracy was bragging about it later to kids in other classes, like it was some kind of achievement, like publicly humiliating someone about a bodily function was comedy gold instead of just cruel. I hadn't even gotten my period yet. That would come later in an even more humiliating way. But at 11 years old, periods were already this mysterious, terrifying thing we all whispered about but didn't really understand. And now Tracy had turned it into a weapon against me. I don't remember what I said or did in that moment, if anything. I probably tried to laugh it off. I probably acted like it didn't bother me. I probably did whatever I always did when kids were cruel. Made myself smaller, quieter, less of a target. What I do remember is the feeling, that hot, crushing shame that made me want to disappear into the floor. That deep knowledge that I would never, ever be safe here. Years later, decades later, someone from that class reached out to me, Jennifer M. She'd been one of the girls I thought of as cool adjacent, friendly with the popular girls, but somehow not quite one of them. We'd actually run into each other a few times over the years, at the bagel shop, at Walmart, random encounters where we'd chat and catch up. She was always kind to me during those interactions, always genuine. And thanks to Facebook, we've become closer over the years. She's a really kind and supportive person. When I asked people for stories from our childhood for this book, she sent me a message about that day with the maxi pad. She remembered it. She'd watched it happen. She'd been disgusted by it even then, as a 6th grader who didn't yet know how to speak up, but knew in her bones that it was wrong. I really fucking hate that happened that day in the back corner of Miss Cummings' grade 6 class, she wrote to me all these years later. She'd been carrying that memory too, not necessarily because she was traumatized by it, she wasn't the target, but because she'd witnessed cruelty and hadn't known how to stop it, and that had stayed with her. I was grateful for her message, grateful that someone had seen, grateful that someone remembered and still thought it was wrong. But here's what struck me most. Jennifer M. also told me another story in that message. By grade 8, she'd found her voice. When a teacher tried to humiliate a kid named Dan, called him the class nerd in front of her mother, used him as an example of the worst possible seat assignment, Jennifer had called the teacher out. She told him Dan had interesting things to say, that she enjoyed talking to him, that the teacher's comment was rude, and he should have taken the time to actually get to know Dan instead of dismissing him. She got banned from the school dance for it. She showed up anyway and got in. That's when she learned that sometimes using your voice comes with consequences, but sometimes it's worth it anyway. I tell you this because it matters. The same kids who witnessed my bullying were learning their own lessons about silence and speaking up. Some of them, like Debbie, were being bullied by me. Some of them, like Jennifer M., were watching all of it and trying to figure out when to intervene. We were all navigating the same toxic environment, all trying to survive in our own ways. Some of us became bullies. Some of us became victims. Most of us were both at different times. And some of us, the lucky ones, eventually learned to use our voices to stop the cycles instead of perpetuating them. I don't know if I was one of the lucky ones. I hope I was. I hope that whatever cruelty I inflicted as a scared, hurt kid trying to feel powerful, I learned to do better. I hope Debbie knows I meant my apology, even if the timing was terrible. I hope Jennifer M. knows how much it meant that she remembered, that she cared, that she carried that moment with her for 40 years because it mattered. And I hope that somewhere Dan knows that at least one person stood up for him when it counted. During this time, I also got a lot closer to my dad. My dad was always my buddy. We called each other buddy. If you read my book, All These Beautiful Things, you already know about the special friendship I had with my dad. But he was my quiet hero through so many things. And during this time with my skin, he was around a lot for me. He's the one who drove me to Stony Creek for my frequent dermatologist appointments. We often listened to the Beach Boys and just had fun laughing and being silly. One afternoon on the drive home, I was feeling particularly insecure. One of those days where every comment or stare from society felt like it was echoing in my head, where I couldn't stop thinking about all the ways I was different, all the reasons people found to mock me. My dad must have sensed it because he turned down the Beach Boys and said, "You know, people can be strange about the weirdest things." He told me about how the guys at work had discovered he loved Mr. Bojangles by the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band. For some inexplicable reason, they mocked him mercilessly for it. This Elvis and Beach Boys fan who'd somehow committed the cardinal sin of loving a beautiful, melancholy song about loss and friendship. "So I just stopped mentioning it," he said with a shrug. "It's still one of my favorite songs. I still listen to it. I just don't talk about it with them anymore." It was the first time I'd ever heard him mention loving that song, and somehow knowing that my dad, my confident, capable, beloved dad, also had something he had to keep quiet about because of judgment, made me feel less alone. It also made me sad, because here was this wonderful man who had to hide something as harmless as a song preference, just to avoid ridicule. Even then, I understood. Sometimes staying quiet wasn't about shame, it was about survival. It was about protecting the things you loved from people who wouldn't understand them. I just didn't know yet how much of my life I'd spend doing exactly that. When I finally went back to school 3 months later, I was nervous as hell. My skin was slightly better, but not great. I was behind on all the social dynamics, all the gossip, all the shifting alliances that happened in the middle school hallways. But there was someone new. Sally had arrived from England while I was gone, and she was navigating her own version of outsider status. New country, new accent, new everything. The popular girls hadn't quite figured out where to place her yet, which meant she was in social limbo, just like me. We found each other the way outsiders do, cautiously, hopefully, with the recognition that comes from understanding what it feels like to not quite fit. "You're the girl who was sick," she said on my first day back, not accusingly, but matter-of-factly. "You're the girl from England," I said back. And somehow that was enough. Sally didn't care what I looked like. She didn't care about the rumors or the AIDS bullshit or any of it. She was dealing with her own stuff, missing her friends back home, trying to understand why Canadian kids were so different, figuring out how to belong in a place that felt foreign. We bonded over being misunderstood, over feeling like we were watching everyone else from the outside, over the exhausting work of trying to figure out where we fit. One day we decided we could be friends, but we couldn't tell another girl she had become close to. Both Sally and Kelly saw past the surface, past the scabs and the weight gain and the social awkwardness. They saw me, and for the first time in a long-ass time, that felt like enough. Grade 8 was supposed to be my redemption year. The skin condition was finally improving. We still didn't know what was causing it, but whatever the dermatologists were doing seemed to be working. The scabs were healing, the cracking was stopping, I was starting to look human again. And then, miracle of miracles, the braces came off. I'll never forget looking in the mirror that day, seeing my straight teeth, feeling like maybe, finally, I could start over. Maybe I could be normal. Maybe I could fit in. It was months later that we figured out the connection, the nickel allergy. the braces that had been slowly poisoning me for years, all that suffering, all that isolation, all that pain, and it was caused by something so simple, so fixable. I was furious and relieved in equal measure. Furious that it had taken so long to figure out, relieved that it wasn't some mysterious, incurable condition that would define me forever. But the damage was done. 3 years of brutal bullying don't just disappear because your skin clears up. 3 years of being treated like a walking disease don't just vanish because you finally understand what was wrong. I was still the fat girl. I was still the weird girl who'd missed months of school. I was still carrying all the weight, literal and metaphorical, of everything that had happened. But at least I had Sally and Kelly. At least now I wasn't facing it alone. And then came the high school orientation. It was a warmer spring day when Mrs. Harrison's grade 8 class walked from Brant Hills Public School to M.M. Robinson High School. We were supposed to get a taste of what high school would be like, meet some of the teachers, see the cafeteria, figure out where our lockers might be. I was nervous but excited. High school felt like another chance to reinvent myself. Bigger school, more kids, more opportunities to find my people. We were standing in the main hallway trying to look cool and mature while secretly feeling like tiny children, because we were, when he approached our group. "Hey there, grade 8s, he said, all charm and confidence. "I'm Brandon. Just wanted to welcome you guys to MM. He was maybe 16, 17, not ancient, but definitely older in the way that mattered when you were 13. Cute in a boy next door way, he had longer, wavy hair, but not like the skids who hung out in the pit. The smoker's pit our school had for the teens who smoked. What a wild time, eh? But more of a surfer dude look, with the kind of easy smile that made you feel special for being noticed. He chatted with a few of us, asking about what classes we were excited about, what sports we might try out for, the kind of casual conversation that felt very grown up and sophisticated. When he talked to me, he seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. Asked about my favorite subjects, laughed at a joke I made eye contact like I was worth paying attention to. I walked away from that interaction feeling seen, feeling like maybe high school would be different, like maybe I was finally ready to be the person I'd always wanted to be. Looking back now, I can see what he was doing. He was scanning our little group, looking for the most vulnerable, the most eager to please, the most desperate for attention and validation. He found exactly what he was looking for. But that day, all I saw was a friendly, older boy who'd taken the time to welcome us. Someone who lived in the neighborhood, someone who might become a friend, someone who made me feel like I mattered. I had no idea I'd just met my predator. I had no idea that everything I'd survived up to this point, the silencing, the bullying, the isolation, the desperate need to be seen and accepted, had been preparing me to be the perfect victim. All I knew was that for the first time in years, someone had looked at me and smiled like I was worth smiling at, and that felt like salvation. It was actually the beginning of my destruction. What's actually true? Bullying isn't about what's wrong with the target, it's about what's missing in the bullies. When children are cruel, when they turn illness into ammunition and difference into disgrace, they're not responding to your inadequacy. They're expressing their own fear, their own need to feel powerful, their own desperate attempt to avoid being one singled out. The AIDS hysteria, the mockery of medical conditions, the isolation of anyone who looked different, none of that was about you being wrong or broken or deserving of cruelty. It was about a system that teaches children that some people are worth less than others, that difference is dangerous, that survival means making someone else the target. The girl who was called diseased and dangerous wasn't sick. The environment was taught children to weaponize illness was sick. What cruel words have you been carrying as truth about yourself? What names were you called that you started believing? Right now, say out loud, that wasn't about me. That was about their fear, their cruelty, their need to feel powerful. Your worth was never determined by their words. Permission slip. I give myself permission to stop carrying other people's cruelty as evidence of my unworthiness. I give myself permission to see bullying for what it was, their issue, not my inadequacy. I give myself permission to be different, to take up space, to exist without apologizing for not fitting their narrow definition of acceptable. I am allowed to be different. I am allowed to take up space. I am allowed to exist without being perfect. I am worthy of kindness, belonging, and love exactly as I am. The people who couldn't see your worth were the ones lacking vision, not you lacking value. This week, catch yourself when you start believing old cruel voices about your worth. Replace one negative belief from your bullying experiences with the truth. You were never the problem. The cruelty was the problem. Practice seeing yourself through compassionate eyes instead of through the lens of old wounds. Every time I talk about childhood, I'm reminded of how brutal these early social ecosystems really are. I say this a lot. I often start, every time I talk about childhood, I'm reminded of. Adults like to romanticize childhood as carefree and innocent, right? But kids can be some of the most observant and ruthlessly efficient social beings on the planet. They create these hierarchies instantly, who's in, who's out, who's acceptable, who's different. And those labels stick long before a child even understands why they're being singled out. Social hierarchies in schools are fucking brutal, and they're designed to keep certain kids on top while others scramble for scraps of acceptance. So if you were ever the kid on the outside looking in, wondering what was wrong with you, that you couldn't crack that damn code, let me tell you, there was no code. The game was rigged from the start. Popular kids aren't popular because they're better people. They're popular because they learned early how to weaponize conformity and use exclusion as power. So here's what I know now that I wish I had known then. Bullies don't pick on people because there's something wrong with their targets. They pick on people who seem like they won't fight back. It's not about your face or your weight or your clothes. It's about power, and they're looking for someone who seems powerless. So if you're being bullied right now as an adult, if you were bullied as a kid, please understand that it was never about what was wrong with you. It's what is wrong with them. Psychologists call this early social stratification, and it's one of the most powerful shaping forces of a person's identity. Most of us remember at least one moment from childhood, one comment, one laugh, one look even, that rewired something inside of us. Excuse me. And it's incredible how the body still remembers that sting decades later. It's pretty sad. One thing we rarely discuss is how public humiliation impacts a child's nervous system as well. Even a small moment, the wrong shoes or a strange haircut, Tupperware number 3 happening up there, an unexpected physical change, becomes a flashing neon sign, basically, that says you're being watched. And for a kid, that awareness is really overwhelming, not because they're vain or fragile, but because belonging is literally a survival need at that age. A child who feels publicly exposed learns quickly how to scan every room and every expression on every face and every potential threat, right? That's hypervigilance. And most adults calling themselves people pleasers or overthinkers don't realize that it started back on the playground. That's another layer as well. And there's another layer too, the way that adults often minimize these moments, right? Kids are mean, you'll be fine. You'll toughen up, just ignore them. But the reality is children don't have the emotional tools to metabolize shame, right? They only know how to bury it. And what we bury in childhood often emerges later in ways that we can't trace back to the original wound. Make sense? Food addiction is real, and it's often trauma trying to keep you safe. When the world feels really dangerous, our brains kind of look for ways anyway, to feel better. And food provides this immediate comfort and dopamine. It's awful. Your body learned that bigger meant harder to hurt. Food meant comfort when nothing else did. If you're struggling with emotional eating, if you ever have, be gentle with yourself. You're not weak or lacking willpower. You're just using the tools that you have to cope with pain that feels unbearable right now. Something else that I find fascinating is how early experiences with embarrassment shape our body identity. Kids aren't analyzing their bodies until something draws attention to them. Usually from another child who has no idea the weight of what they're saying, right? A single comment can turn a body part into a lifelong insecurity. The brain becomes a magnifying glass, scanning that part relentlessly as if the body betrayed them somehow. And the rumors and mass hysteria, preying on fear and ignorance, like that's how it works. When people treat you like you're contaminated and you start to feel contaminated, when enough people act like you're dangerous, you start to wonder if maybe you are. This is gaslighting on a social level, when a group convinces you that their false reality is actually the truth. If you've ever been the target of rumors or mass social rejection, and I certainly have, that confusion you felt wasn't weakness. It was your brain trying to make sense of a situation that made no sense. Something that's important, sometimes the bravest thing that you can do is admit you can't handle something anymore. Sometimes retreat is the only way to survive, like when I needed to leave school. If you're in a situation right now that's breaking you down day by day, please know that choosing to remove yourself isn't giving up. It's choosing yourself. It's recognizing that your mental health is more important than other people's expectations. Now, I want to talk about friends for a second here too, because Kelly and Sally, real friends don't disappear when things get ugly. They don't treat your pain like it's contagious. They don't make you feel like you need to hide parts of yourself to be acceptable. If you have someone in your life who shows up for you when you're at your worst, who sees your worth when you can't see it yourself, hold on to that person, because that is so damn rare and precious. And if you don't have that person yet, don't give up. They exist, and they're looking for you too. Sometimes the friends who bring out your rebellious side are the ones who save you as well. Not because rebellion is inherently good, but because it reminds you that you have agency. You can make choices. You're not just a passive victim of your circumstances, right? So if you had a friend who made you feel brave enough to break rules, who reminded you that you were more than your trauma, hold on to that memory, especially if you haven't held on to the friend. That friend was teaching you that you had power, even when everything else made you feel powerless. I also wanted to talk about something else that the wording of it in the book. Hurt people hurt people. It's the most cliche and absolutely my most hated saying in psychology. But it's the most accurate. When you're drowning, sometimes you push others under to keep yourself afloat. That doesn't make it right, but it makes it human. The goal isn't to be perfect victims or perfect heroes. The goal is to recognize the cycles and own your part in them and do better when you know better. If you were both bullied and a bully, if you hurt people while you were being hurt, it's not hypocrisy. It's normal. That's just humanity. The question isn't whether you were perfect then, it's whether you're doing better now. I'm going to pop back to Sally again too. Sometimes the best friendships are born from shared outsider status. When you find people who understand what it's like to not fit in, who don't need you to be different than you are, and they see your worth when the world tells you that you're a worthless piece of shit, those are your people. Don't waste time chasing acceptance from people who've already decided you're not enough. And I'm looking at you, popular girls. Find the ones who know that you're more than enough just as you are. And I just want to say something about recovery as well. I will repeat this a lot. Healing is not linear, and it's not just about fixing the original problem. When you've been traumatized, when you've been systematically dehumanized, healing the physical stuff is just the beginning. The real work is healing the parts of you that learned you weren't safe and you weren't worthy and you weren't enough. And if you're in recovery from literally anything, addiction, abuse, trauma, mental illness, be patient with yourself, because your body might heal faster than your spirit, and that's okay. So just give yourself time to trust that the good things are real. And now I just want to touch on Brandon for a second, because we're about to give a couple more chapters to him. Predators are experts at identifying vulnerability. They look for kids who seem isolated, desperate for acceptance, grateful for basic kindness. They find children who've been taught that their needs don't matter, whose voices have been systematically silenced. People who are so hungry for validation that they will accept attention from anyone who offers it. If you're a parent, a teacher, or someone who works with kids, pay attention to the ones who light up when adults notice them. Pay attention to the ones who seem too grateful for basic kindness, because those are the kids predators target. And if you were that kid, if you recognize yourself in this description, please know that your hunger for love and acceptance wasn't wrong. Your need to be seen and valued was normal and healthy. And the people who exploited those needs were the problem. not you. And I don't know if I was Brandon's first. I don't think I was, especially hindsight. And I don't think I was the last either. And that bothers me. But anyway, I just want to go back. The part I want, you all to hear clearly. Every moment that we've experienced with, desperation to be loved and accepted, and literally anything that makes us feel like we maybe chose or did the wrong thing, or like I used the word desperate. Those moments, they don't define us. They influence us, yes, sometimes deeply, but they're not permanent architecture. They're more like temporary scaffolding. They held us up at a time because we didn't know anything else. But in adulthood, we get to walk back into those memories and reinterpret them with a fully developed brain, with compassion and with context. And it's powerful realizing the child who felt humiliated isn't weak. They were unprotected. That's all. There's a difference. And that's where the healing starts. Giving that child, if you go back to your younger self, the one who froze or laughed along or tried to disappear, something they never got in that moment, that safety, validation, that permission to be human. Childhood cruelty doesn't have to dictate adult self-worth at all. We get to rewrite the meaning, even if we can't rewrite the moment that it happened in. So if this chapter stirred anything in you, any old memory you haven't thought of in years, pay attention to it. Not necessarily to relive the shame. Please don't do that. But to finally acknowledge the child who didn't deserve it and didn't know how to process it. And that's where integration begins. You might notice something strange when you do that. The memory doesn't hurt the same way, because it doesn't. And the adult version of you is sitting beside the child version now. So yeah, that's it. Thanks so much for being here. Please make sure to follow me wherever you listen to me, so when new episodes come out, you will be notified. Remember, all episodes of Unbound are free. If you want to support the production costs, you can find me on Ko-fi, but there's never any obligation. The content will always be free, because barriers to healing shouldn't be financial. All the support and contact info is in the show notes. And if you join the Facebook group, we sometimes have further conversations there, as well as giveaways and other fun things mentioned in off-script episodes. I will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Unbound with Beth Curry. Join the conversation in the Facebook group or visit author.bethcurry.com. Want to support the show? Head to ko-fi.com/Unbound Podcast. Until next time, stay unbound.